Peace, peace, peace. You are now tuned into the vault. Just want to thank you for tuning in live, listening to your host Sharif Ali. Just want to thank you for tuning in. Tonight we're going to have a wonderful episode. Good day, good night, wherever you are in the world. Just want to thank you for listening live or in the archives. This is called The Vault. I am your host Sharif Ali. We come on every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 7 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Pacific, every single Tuesday, talking about entrepreneurship topics, business, and all of the above. So, just really excited today. I want to talk about a very important subject that it seems that a lot of individuals have issues with. And I really want to just make it a point to address this issue so you can become a better entrepreneur, go out and know how to address lawyers, and accountants and CPAs, because as an entrepreneur, you hire a lawyer. As an entrepreneur, you hire a CPA. So it's rather imperative that we learn how to address these people and not have them talk to us as though they're helping us create something greater than what we are. We're actually helping them, and they're helping us implement our strategy. So very, very important to understand that, put us in the correct position. So tonight, my whole goal, my whole aim is to put us all in a position where we can move forward in that fashion. So just excited about that. Gonna make it a point to do that and move forward from there. So tonight's episode is going to be about unincorporated business entities versus incorporated business entities. Very, very important subject. The difference between an unincorporated and an incorporated and an unincorporated business entity. There is a big difference, and so we want to address those things tonight. And so that's what my aim is, to work with you all and share with you all the importance of understanding how to utilize and deal with these entities, and even talking to people about it. So this isn't legal advice. It doesn't need to be branded as legal advice. This is just conversation between men and women, talking about the differences between incorporated and unincorporated business entities and things of that nature. So we're going to just go ahead and get into it. I'm going to point out some of the differences so you can recognize the differences, and then as well, even some of the benefits of some of them. Sharif Ali, I do host quarterly events. I also do private workshops. I do one-day intensives. I do even consultations one-on-one. So if it's something that you would like to know more about, feel free to email me at hfrn.vault@gmail.com, and we can move forward from there. But that's a big deal for you all. If that's something that you all want to take advantage of, once again, you can contact me at hfrn.vault@gmail.com, and we can move forward as far as that goes. So I look forward to connecting with you all in that respect. Otherwise, we're just going to go ahead and get into what we call incorporated differences between incorporated and unincorporated business. So the first thing that I really want to stress to you all and talk to you all about, which is incorporated. Incorporated entities are generally going to be dealing with the statutory side, dealing with the legislative side. That means that it's within the state jurisdiction, it's created within the state jurisdiction. So when we're talking about incorporated entities, we're talking about LLCs, S corps, and C corps, those type of things. Those things are under a state jurisdiction. Those things are under a statutory jurisdiction. So when you understand that these entities are set up based off of the fact that they get their rights, they get their privileges, they get their rules, they get their regulations from the state, that's a big deal for you all to be able to understand the differences and be able to move forward from that perspective. It's very important to understand that. So we're going to go ahead and keep it moving. So when it comes to individuals understanding that there is a public side and a private side, this is why I do these episodes. It's for individuals to understand that there's a public side and there's a private side. The public side is generally dealing with the statutory, once again, statutory law, dealing with legislative law, whereas the private side is more focused on common law. So when individuals and people want to partake in information about common law is dealing with the fact that the reason why we deal in common law is because the United States is set up off of common law. Every state of the United States Union is utilizing the common law of England, which is common law right to contract. That means that no state can impair the obligation of anyone creating a contract. And that is stated in Article 1, Section 10 of the United States Constitution, which is, in part, Article 1, Section 10, no state can impair the obligation of contracts. So it's very critical for you to understand that in the United States, they give every individual in a private capacity to create contracts, whereas in a public capacity, because of different things that have gone on, quote unquote, government needs to regulate the public. Whereas there's private going on all the time. A lot of individuals are familiar with private corporations, but they're not familiar with how to set these entities up. And that's why I addressed it the way that I did on Facebook and YouTube, which was, why can't your lawyer, why your lawyer will never set up a private corporation for you, is because most lawyers are educated in public law. This is the reality. The education and stuff that I'm talking to you all about comes from a private education. I've been instructed by a private mentor, by a private community. The information I talk about is not something that's discussed generally in the public, because it's just not. Private individuals consider public individuals liabilities, because public individuals want to own everything. So when it comes to understanding the difference between public and private, you have to really have that solid in your mind. You all hear all the time that there is a public corporation and a private corporation, but you're not going to get a public attorney to set up a private corporation for you, because they're considered a public attorney. They're under the same laws that I'm talking to you all about, which are state laws, statutory laws. They only deal in statutory jurisdictions. They don't deal in private jurisdictions. You have to get them in a specific capacity to be able to deal in that private jurisdiction, in that private capacity. So it's very important to understand that. So when it comes to the S Corp and C Corps and LLCs, those things are statutory based entities, whereas common law based entities are based off of common law rights to contract. So me and you, based off of Article 1, Section 10 of the United States Constitution, and not only that, each of the subsequent states other than Louisiana, we have the right to contract unlimited as private people. Me and you at right now, or anyone, can create a private contract. So when people say, well, how do you set up a private corporation, or how is a private corporation formed? It's formed based off of a contract where it doesn't involve the public, where it doesn't involve the statutory jurisdiction. Now, granted, it does have the term does have the term corporation, but that doesn't mean that it's incorporated. That means that it's unincorporated. That means it's not under the jurisdiction of the United States or under the particular state that it's doing business in. That just means that it is unincorporated. Why? Because it's not under any state jurisdiction. See, there's no such thing as a United States corporation. It's a state corporation. Think about it. When you go get the actual corporation from let's just say you're gonna go get a Georgia corporation. You're gonna go get a Jello. Thank you, Angelica, for tuning in live. Appreciate you for tuning in live. When you get a state-based corporation, it's state-based. When you apply for that EIN for it, you actually are applying to a federal jurisdiction, which is the IRS. That's federal. It's not based off a state. So when individuals don't know the difference and they're doing business, that's the big difference, is that an individual doesn't know that, yeah, wow, when I go apply for an EIN, traditionally I'm going to the IRS, which is a federal entity, because it deals on a federal level, not on the state. So when your corporation is dealing, that's why some people say, oh, I had to go get an EIN for my state corporation. You're right. You do have to go get an EIN for your state corporation sometime. So it's very important to understand how the entity is formed, how the entity is maintained, how the entity is utilized, things of that nature. And when you understand that, it's based off of the jurisdiction. This is all about jurisdiction. Public and private is jurisdiction. It's not anything else but that. Where's the contract formed? Me and you can form a contract in our mind, whether you know it or not. So when you understand that if the private is based off of contracts, that's how the private is set up. That's how an unincorporated entity is set up. It's based off of a contract. It's based off of the common law right to contract. Article 1, Section 10, no state can impair the obligation of our contracts. So not only that, when we go back to our statutory side, statutory limitations say that statutory says, okay, if we're going to create an entity, it's going to be under the state law. It's an agreement. Think about it. When you go and apply for a statutory entity, keyword is you apply. You're asking the state for permission. The state is its own jurisdiction. It's its own entity. The state dictates what goes on, how that entity is going to operate within the state, the laws that it can and can't abuse, things of that nature. Whereas an unincorporated business entity is based off of a contract, which means that as long as it doesn't infract or go against public policy, it's able to do business within that jurisdiction. Why is it able to do business within that jurisdiction or utilizing that space? Why? Because it is a private contract. The United States or that state, that common law state, recognizes that contract being a contract. Why? Article 1, Section 10, and in that state's constitution, recognizing that state and that state's right to contract outside of Louisiana. So it recognizes that the fact that you can have a private contract in that state and utilize that contract and never have any tax consequence associated with it. Why? Because it's a private contract. It didn't say it was a public contract. It said no state will impair the obligation of the contract. The contract is a private contract. Why is it a private contract? Because it doesn't involve the government. Because me and you can contract and never involve the government. That's how unincorporated entities are formed. That's how the people are dealing with them. They're dealing with them from the perspective of, well, guess what? We don't have to deal in taxes. We don't have to deal in any of those things. Why? Because it's a private entity. It's formed through contract, private contract. We're not involving the government. It's only involving the government when you deal in incorporation, when you deal in an incorporated capacity, when you go into a statutory jurisdiction. Once again, this is all about jurisdiction. So, common law is dealing with the private aspect. Common law right to contract. The reason why you're not going to get your public lawyer, once again, to be able to set these entities up is because you hear about the private and you say, oh, you know, there's a private corporation. Well, think about it. There are entities that call themselves corporations, but they're not corporations. They're trusts. Once again, I'll let you all know that the private or the common law is based off a contract, which a trust is nothing more than a contract. A trust is a contract. So if a trust is a contract, it can state that it's called a corporation, but not actually be taxed as a corporation. That is the power of a contract. Why? Because contract makes the law. No state will impair the obligation of a contract. So if the contract says it's going to look like a corporation, but it's going to be treated as a trust still, then the IRS is completely okay with that. Why? Because they don't care about what it's called. They care about what it's doing. The conduct of the entity. How is it conducting itself? Is it conducting itself as a trust, or is it conducting itself as an actual corporation? Yeah, it's called a corporation on the outside, but in all actuality, it's a trust. So when you all hear about private corporations or unincorporated entities, traditionally they're going to be contract trust. A trust is nothing more than a contract. So it's very imperative for individuals to focus on learning how to deal in contracts. Period. That's unincorporated business entities. Me and you can create a private business, unincorporated, tomorrow or today. Whereas when you're incorporated, you got to go down to the state. You got to deal in the state. You got to go under the state rules. We got to deal under the state and what the state's talking about. How much gas we can deduct. How much we can, because we're applying to them for what's considered a privilege. Whereas in a private capacity or common law jurisdiction, all we're doing is stating the terms of the contract. The terms of the contract is anytime we're conducting business, it's going to be some form of an expense. Period. It's that simple. That's how private business is conducted. Public business is completely different. The public is based off of taxes. The private's not based off of taxes. So when you hear rich people say they don't pay taxes, it's because they have their affairs structured privately. They're not focused on having them structured publicly. That's why the President of the United States, Donald Trump, can say, I don't have any public tax returns to show you. Why? Because he's not in the public. He's in the private. His money is tied up privately. It's not tied up publicly. It's tied up privately. And he doesn't own it. He controls it. He controls it from a perspective of limited liability. He controls it from a position of own nothing, control everything. That is how wealthy individuals operate. Thank you, Keyway, for tuning in live. You say, so how do you obtain a EIN or a TIN? What do you mean, how do you obtain it? What do you mean exactly, how do we obtain it? Like, it's you use an SS4 form. SS4 form is how you obtain EINs. And I don't deal with TINs, so I wouldn't be able to deal with it on that level. But when you say how do we obtain it, you fill out the SS4 form, you go to the Social Security, well, not Social Security, you go to the IRS, and they allot a number for an entity. It's that simple. You deal with the SS4 form. So if you want to go into more detail, feel free to type more into the questions, more detail into the chat, and we can move forward from there. But like I say, you all, there's a difference between public and private. I got to share this with you all, because otherwise you're going to go your whole life, you're going to think that the government's trying to control your life. Government not trying to control your life. The government's taking care of people that don't want to take care of themselves. I'm sorry to say it that way. That's the reality. People that want handouts. Otherwise, you can create. That's what we're all here for, is to create. We're divine creators. You're not supposed to have the government taking care of you. But instead, that's what's going on right now. So people think the government's out to get them. Man, government's not out to get nobody. It's here to do business. And that business is for the general welfare of the public, to take care of people that can't take care of themselves, to pass general rules and provisions for the whole so people can't infract against each other. But you all know that it may have gotten a little out of hand with some of the rules being a little far reaching, but that's why they never took away Article 1, Section 10 of the United States. They never took away Article 1, Section 10. They haven't taken away the fact that they're still distributing gold and silver. You all can go to the U.S. Mint. You all can go to your local coin dealer and get real money, gold and silver. While everyone's running around trying to knock Federal Reserve notes, why are you knocking something instead of focusing on the positive and going out and getting some real money, gold and silver? Wealthy people are buying it. They set in record numbers every year. You can go look at the United States Mint. There's been years where the United States Mint has run out of being able to sell enough gold and silver, because there's a scarcity on the planet as far as how much is actually here and how much they're mining every year. But point being is you can still go buy real money, gold and silver, have something to hold value for generations to come. We all know that Federal Reserve notes haven't been here for even longer than 1913, 1933. So when it comes to Federal Reserve notes, you don't have to use those things. You can use gold and silver. So it's very important to put yourself in a position where you own nothing, control everything, utilizing unincorporated entities. Why? Because if you own something, you can be taxed for it. If you own something, you can be sued for it. Remember, the natural you is never in commerce. It's always the commercial you. Everyone doesn't want to understand or know what a commercial them is. The commercial them is the Social Security number. The commercial them is utilizing a EIN. That's an entity. You have to put on the form or the entity a shell. The IRS doesn't recognize natural persons. It recognizes what? It recognizes legal fictions, business entities. If me and you did business and we traded some type of energy, that's not going to get taxed. What they tax is what? Federal Reserve notes. They're taxing commercial instruments. That's what they're taxing. So when you deal in incorporated entities, you're dealing with entities that are under the public jurisdiction. When you deal in private entities, you have a lot more non-disclosure there. That's the benefit of dealing in unincorporated business entities, not private entities. Not incorporated entities. Privacy is everything. Wealthy people know how to maintain their privacy, but this information doesn't get to the public. Why? Because public schools are in incorporated municipalities. So why would a private individual educate the public municipality? It doesn't work that way. There's a clear distinguishment between public and private. And you have to understand the difference. You have to be able to live your life and understand the difference. I understand that this information is not shared in the public. Why? Because it's called the public. What we're talking about is dealing with private information. Public and private don't mix. That's why they just say, oh yeah, the private sector's doing well. But in all actuality, the private sector's never done bad. Because that's where no tax avoidance is going on. Whereas in the public, if you don't pay taxes, that's tax evasion. In the private, that's tax avoidance. Unincorporated business trust, unincorporated business is tax avoidance. Whereas incorporated is dealing with what? Straight up tax evasion if you don't pay. That's the facts, or the entity don't pay. And I don't get why people don't want to file taxes. It's a filing. It's that simple. So I don't need to be long-winded on this episode. I really want to talk about the differences. I challenge you all to go to your lawyer or go to a lawyer and say, can you set up a private corporation, or explain to me how to set up a private corporation? And that's how you're going to know that they don't have the education. What I'm talking to you all about is an education I received from a private mentor who was mentored by wealthy individuals, who dealt with wealthy individuals that live their life through privacy, just like the president of the United States that says, guess what? I don't own anything, so I can't show any tax returns. It's that simple. Public and private don't mix. He don't have any public tax returns filed. Why? Because he's not receiving any money personally. It's going to the unincorporated entities that he's utilizing, through the trust, through the foundations that he's using. You all see that all rich people have foundations. It's not a coincidence. See, wealthy people know what information to utilize. Wealthy people know which information to file taxes with and what not to. It's the public who doesn't understand what to deal with. Why? Because they've been given education by public individuals. Once again, public and private don't mix. There's a private set of information and there's a public set of information. This is the reality that we're facing here. And guess what? The private information is contracts, because contract law is private law. And the public it's let me find out how to basically learn how to live my life. When guess what? Family law is private law. So when you see what I share with you all, I learned this information from a private family, from a private community. Private law, family law is private law. Private law is dealing with contracts once again. So all of this is private. It's focused on maintaining privacy for the families. You think the Rockefellers aren't one of the richest families in the world? But you see Jeff Bezos take over Bill Gates. You think how someone behind going to catch up? He didn't catch up. All Bill Gates did was say, I don't need any more personal money coming to me. I'm going to let it go directly to my foundation. So it goes straight from Microsoft, and Microsoft receives a tax deduction for giving the money away to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Bill and Melinda are still in control of. That is how wealthy people operate. They know what to do. So it leads you to believe is who's really operating in the proper capacity. That's what it is. That's what it comes down to. Are you going to put yourself in a position where you can pass on wealth generationally and not have to deal with the public taxes that are going to be estate tax, probate tax, inheritance tax? By the time your children get it, it's down to 20%. 100% of what you work your life for, your children are going to receive 20% of it. Kuwait, thank you. He said, you answered my question. For some reason, I thought an EIN and TIN automatically comes to tax obligation on profits. Is this not the case because of it being a private trust? So, okay, EIN is an employer identification number. You're going to need that to open up a bank account. So when it comes to, any entity that's doing business in the public, it's going to have, if it's going to deal with Federal Reserve notes, even at a bank, it's going to have to deal with an EIN. That's what it's going to have to deal with. So whether it's taxed on that money or not, it's based off of the fact whether it has a thing called minimum contacts. That's a legal term. And that basically states that the entity is either doing business in the capacity of, it's going to be dealing in the capacity of the fact that it's incurring a tax liability because it's doing business with a trade or business within the United States. If your entity, if the private trust that you're talking about, if it doesn't do business in the United States, then it doesn't need a EIN. But if it's going to do business within the United States, if it's doing business within the United States, it's going to need an EIN. And if it's a private contract, then that's a private contract. No doubt about it. It's a private contract. But when you're dealing, once again, with public liabilities or in a public capacity, that's what these individuals want to know is, are you dealing with a tax liability? And that comes from a minimum contact. So you want to do your research on minimum contacts so you can see, okay, this is what's really going on. Is I got to make sure that the entity is either not going to incur tax liability or it is. That's the job of you as the trustee of any type of trust or anything of that nature. So when you say does it automatically have to have it, a private trust contract can be known as an asset holding entity. So someone said Do you have? Thank you for tuning in live. I don't know. It's like a couple letters in cynical. Um, it says that's their name. So it says, do you have to be a secure party creditor or file a UCC one in order to discharge utility bills? So this show right here is about incorporating unincorporated business trust. I'm actually going to bring on, which is quite interesting that you actually, ask me these questions, because I actually have a mentor, have been trained in secure party creditor information. And so next week, I'm actually going to be transitioning and revealing a lot more about myself, but also bringing on my mentor in that area, who has been dealing that I've been dealing with for 3 to 4 years now in that area and has educated me. So I'm not going to ruin that surprise for you. So don't get upset that I'm not ruining your surprise for you or answering your question directly. So please, if you haven't subscribed to the channel. If not, you can go back and listen to the episode next week. But I definitely am going to go over the fact that, yes, when it comes to discharge, it is very real. When it comes to making sure that you are in compliance with understanding how to use commercial contracts, because all it comes down to, UCC is Uniform Commercial Code, which is dealing with uniform commercial contracts. So it's definitely something that you would need to learn how to deal in contracts properly. And just like I educated you, the reason why I have not shared most of that information with individuals is because contract law is private law. So secure party creditor is a private position that you're taking when it comes to the public. That's what it comes down to. Now, when it comes down to bills and things of that nature, those are things that, I won't ruin the surprise. I'm going to be bringing my private contract law mentor next week. It's funny that you actually asked this question, but that's something I'm doing. And that's why I say, I don't have nothing to hide. So when it comes to secure party creditor, I love the secure party creditor process because it brings transparency. It brings things in a position of disclosure. It brings a position of disclosure. It brings a position of responsibility, because when you're in a position of saying, I want to discharge some bills, that means you understand the reality of what's going on, that we're dealing inside of a bankrupt and commercial system. See, people, I'm not going to go there. There's a difference between incorporated and unincorporated businesses. One's dealing in more private contracts. The other one's dealing in what's considered public contracts. Does the UCC have anything to do with it? Yes, it does. It has everything to do with it because it's dealing in contracts. So it's very imperative for individuals to understand the difference between public and private, to understand that these things are very real. Running around talking about, oh man, the government doesn't want us to be free and the government doesn't want us to be private. First of all, you got the wrong perspective towards the government. The government is supposed to be the people. But instead, people think the government, this robot, this fictitious entity that's held by public servants. These are servants that are supposed to be meeting your local needs and abroad. Individuals that think they ran into a position of lordship. Somebody's trying to take over their life. Nobody's trying to take over your life if you ain't trying to manage it yourself. Ain't nobody trying to manage dead weight. So I just want to make it a point to share with you all this very valuable aspect of contract law versus private law. A contract law, which is private law, and dealing with it from a public and a private perspective. Mr. Onyx says, so what are your rates for your services? Once again, you can inquire about those things privately, because I don't share those things on the air publicly because they're never the same. Things change based off of the services that are being provided. So, Mr. Onyx, I appreciate you for typing in the question. I thank you for tuning in live, but you can feel free to email me at hfrn.vault@gmail.com. I will type it into the chat before the show is over, and we can go forward from there. I do take consultations, and I also have individuals be able to take advantage of my actual mentor, my contract law mentor. I'm going to be bringing him on next week, and it's going to be an awesome experience because I've had him for a while now, and always love keeping them in my back pocket. But it's time that we come out and we talk about some of the things that we need to talk about, because it's a responsibility for all of us to understand the capacity in which we need to be operating in, which is a private capacity, and then going out and serving in the public, just like all rich and wealthy people are doing. Rich and wealthy people are operating from a private position, and then they come into a public servant position, because that's what they're supposed to be doing in the public, is operating from a public position. as servant position. Excuse me. Key Wade says, does the private trust fall into a tax bracket like other corporations? Okay, so once again, you definitely want to get a consultation, man. You know, I don't have a problem with answering your questions, but I'll share more with you, which is I'm not giving you legal advice. So we can easily go to the IRS website and see that a trust has its own tax form and a corporation has its own tax form. The 1120 is for U.S. corporations. The 1040 is for private trust or for trust in general. So when you say do they fall into the same tax bracket like corporations, if they're filling out two different tax forms, then of course they're going to be on two different tax forms. The brackets that they fall in as far as taxes, then you once again you would have to have a tax advisor, attorney, or a CPA to be able to tell you, okay, this is how much needs to be paid in taxes based off of what liabilities it has. For he said, for instance, politicians argue over the tax bracket percentages. Are they only referring to public corporations or private also? This is the facts. I actually had a really good joke that I got recently. Someone sent it over to me. They say the oldest profession is politicians, and it was between like a bartender and a couple other people, and I'm not able to remember the joke. I can find a joke for y'all, post it on Facebook. It's a good joke though, and it's talking about the oldest profession, and it talks about politicians being the oldest profession. And the thing about it is, first of all, politicians are public servants. They're coming from a private capacity and operating from a public servant position. Once again, Hillary Clinton has a foundation. Once again, I told you all, public people don't know certain things. Private people all got the same structure. Bill Gates got a foundation. Simple. Bill Gates got a foundation. Hillary Clinton got a foundation. Warren Buffett has a foundation. Donald Trump has a foundation. Do you see the theme? But all public individuals, traditional ones walking around that don't have a private education, are walking around talking about, oh yeah, I'm going to keep dealing in this proper capacity because this is the way I've been educated. And right, that shows you there's a clear distinction between public and private. So since remember, a foundation is a tax exempt entity. It's a 501c3 entity. There's two different types of trust. There's operating trust and non-operating trust. There's two different types of foundations. Operating foundations and non-operating foundations. Okay? So when you see that these individuals are utilizing tax-exempt organizations, why would they have those entities set up? That's the question you got to ask yourself. It's not an accident. It's purposeful. Everything has a reason for being. So when they're talking about tax bracket percentages and things like that, they're talking about that for public people, not for themselves. And this is the game that's being played. Why? Because they cannot tell you about private information in the public. So why or how would you know about that? Why would you be upset that they're not talking to you about that? Why are they only talking from a public perspective? Because they're talking to people that don't want to take care of themselves. So that's why they're talking about a tax bracket. Because how are they going to stay in that position and take care of those people if they're not taxing them? That's common sense. So they need to have a gradual income tax bracket. Why? To take care of people that don't want to take care of themselves, that don't want to create. So when it comes to them talking about public corporations, think about it. If it's in a public statutory position, then that's a taxable position. In a private capacity, that we have the right to contract, but that doesn't involve the government. That's why it's considered the private, because me and you can contract unlimited. That doesn't involve the government. The only time we involve the government is when we go and we deal with an application towards a government contract or things of that nature. When we deal with a tax liability, tax liabilities come from being in the public, dealing in public businesses. If we're in the private and we're doing private stuff, we have no issue with it. We have no affiliation with the government. There's nothing wrong with the government. It's called tax avoidance or it's called tax evasion. One of them you practice doing a private practice. The other one you practice is not even a good practice to have. That's called evasion. That's not good. That's bad. Once again, I want to share with you all the things that public individuals are not educated on. That's why I do private events and workshops. That's why I do private one-on-one consultations. It's to share with individuals privately. This is not about having all the information out in the public. Why? Because the public is a liability. These individuals want to own something. You can't own anything. Anything you own, you can be taxed for or sued for. When you're in the public, you shouldn't own anything. But everyone's instructed in the public to own the business, to own this, to own that. In the private, we don't own anything. We control everything. The school system, the water, the food, the clothing, the shelter, the housing prices, the interest rates. Everything's controlled from the private. Private came before public. Why? Because contracts are created in the private and utilized in the public. Once they're utilized in the public, it becomes a public contract. That's the difference. Because contract law is private law. It's not public. So I'll stay on till about 45. I'll answer any questions that you all have. Feel free to ask any questions in the chat. I love the feedback. I love the interaction. Thank you all so much. I look forward to bringing you all some of the best information that's out there on the internet right now. I'm not out here telling you to own anything so you can keep getting taxed to death. They say the only thing you're going to do in life is die and pay taxes. Guess what? Rich people ain't paying taxes, but they definitely going to die. And their legacy is going to be passed on from generation to generation, tax-free. Rothschilds, Rockefellers, Kennedys, Carnegies. You're seeing the new modern ones. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Zuckerbergs. They're doing it right in front of your eyes because they're being instructed by private individuals. And one of those individuals is me. The private individuals that understand that have been instructed by a private family. By private mentorship. This information is passed along through communities, and private mentors. Period. So I'll stay on. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, WTF Cynical. He says, I've been subscribed for a good minute, brother. I would definitely be tuning in. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Just know that I thank you all. I'm not doing this for me, okay? When I bring my contract law mentor next week, he is first class. He will tell you straight up, this is a responsibility. See, there's two types of educations. There's a public education and a private education. You have to enroll in a private mentorship program to understand the difference between public and private. Otherwise, you'll walk around with a public school education that was created by John D. Rockefeller through the General Board of Education, and now it's turned into the Board of Education, and you all can see that. Kuwait Lesbian says, so if you have multiple business projects, would you have a mix of public and private businesses? For me personally, no, I don't deal in public entities. Everything's set up privately. It's private. It's own nothing, control everything. I say this because I'm sure Apple Corp is not under someone's private trust, or is it? Once again, you can see, I share with you all. Go look at Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, when he left Apple for the first time and he went over and created Pixar. When you go Google Steve Jobs Trust and Pixar Trust and him passing that on. It's very important because when he passed away, he actually had trust that he had set up, which are the trust, and they were left to his wife and his children. And so if he had that set up with Pixar, what makes you think Apple is not set up under a trust? So very, very important. She says, so if I go, I guess if they go public or IPO, then they become public. That's so what you're asking is, once again, that's why you see them as it's called a corporation, because a private trust can own a public corporation. They're legal fictions, they're legal persons. So in turn, that private trust owns a public corporation. And the reason why entity goes public is so they can take public people's money, so they can stop using private funds, and now they can use public funds to go out and do more business ventures. That's why it's called an initial public offering. They're offering the company to the public people to invest in the public company so they can go out and do more business. Period. IPO. So yes, a private entity can own that public trust, a public entity, and the reason why they even create public entities to shield themselves so you don't even know that they're not paying taxes. Google is right now in an antitrust lawsuit with the whole European Union. So is Amazon. You all can look into this. These companies aren't paying taxes internationally, let alone nationally. Why? Because they have the correct structures in place, because they have the correct knowledge base in place, they have the correct attorneys in place to make sure they. I sat here and watched the case with Google's antitrust and Amazon's antitrust. They said, well, where is this structure set up, and how would a taxes pay? They didn't even have to disclose this information to the European Union, but these European Union what do you call them? Like politicians are sitting here saying, well, I use Amazon and I use Google, but I don't know how it's actually over here and it's not paying taxes. So they're using these services, and Google and Amazon, Google and Amazon saying, well, we don't have to disclose that information to you. Why? Because there's a clear difference between public and private. That's called private contracts for you. So, Mr. Onyx, who do I contact with when getting into a bank for a private line of credit? Who do you get in contact with? Okay, so if you go into a bank that's insured by the FDIC, that's public all day, every day. I have an episode on private banking, and that's dealing with more of your insurance people. So understanding insurance and things like that, that's private lending. When you go to hard money lenders, those are private lenders. Those are people that have hard cash, not public institutions where you're applying and they have to check your credit score and they have to check this credit information that's on the public side. See, when you're private, you don't ask for credit, you extend it. There's a difference. When you're private, you come in a different perspective, because how are you going to go to a public bank and ask for a private line of credit? It's the public bank. That's why they have things called private lenders. They're not dealing under any statutory. That's the difference between unincorporated and incorporated. Incorporated means that it's a public line of credit. Unincorporated means it's a private line of credit. That means that it's not under any state jurisdiction. So you have to find someone that doesn't have their affairs set up in a statutory or a state jurisdiction type situation. That's simple. You have to come to someone that understands how privately to give money and not have to deal and not be considered a loan shark. You know, those type of people. Private is dealing in private contracts. So, the public is dealing with the fact that the government the group whole has said, hey, we need to make sure that these rules are in place so no one tries to violate these rules and abuse the fact and take advantage of what they consider ignorant people that don't know finance, people that don't understand securities, people that don't understand contracts, because contract law is private law. So they have to put these safe laws in place for people that are ignorant, that don't know. It's not a bad thing, it's just a reality. So it's up to you to learn the knowledge that you need to know, so you don't have to think about the FDIC insuring $250,000 of your money. How is $250,000 protecting a billionaire or a multimillionaire? What now you think about that? A multimillionaire, if he really had his money inside of a bank, he only insured for $250,000. That means anything above $250,000, he will never be able to recoup. Now, how many banks are there operating in the United States that they really can hide multi-millions and millions of dollars? They're not. They understand where to put their money and where not to put their money. Thank you, Trey, for tuning in live. Appreciate you. I thank you all for tuning in live. Thank you all. Appreciate you all. I'm going to take a couple last minute questions. We got 2 minutes here left on the live stream. Please feel free to share this episode with your friends and family so they can understand. You got to be able to at least go talk to a lawyer. I mean, if you can't talk to a lawyer, then you got to enroll in private trustee training. HFRN.vault@gmail.com. We'll go forward from there. Private trustee training. If you're not ready right now, make it a point to do what you got to do to get enrolled. It's that simple. Does it take some time to get yourself situated and you and your friends in your community so you all can come together as private trustees? That's what it's going to take. I did it. I started out trustee training with friends, people that I trusted. Sometimes you got to do it with other people. Don't be selfish. So, thank you all for tuning in live. Peace and blessings. Have a great week. Be a blessing to somebody else. Help someone else out. You know, and on the back end of that, make it a point to think the best of yourself. I must end on this. I had a brother. I put it on Facebook earlier. You can't walk through life with a negative mindset, thinking the government's out to get you, or people are out to get you, or the world's gonna come to an end, or the dollar or the currency's about to crash, you gotta think positive. I'm sorry to say it this way to you, but this is the reality of life. Positive gets positive, negative gets negative. It's called the law of attraction. What you think about the most, you're attracting into your life. If you're thinking about negative, you're attracting negative. If you're thinking about positive, you're attracting positive. The more you go back and forth, that's how your life's going to look. It's going to look like a seesaw. It's going to be going up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. Sometimes you got money, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you got money, sometimes you don't. So if you think about having money all the time, it's most likely you're going to have money all the time. It might not sound easy in the beginning, but the more you focus on it, the more you're going to manifest it. Just like the more you focus on negative, the more you're going to get that. The more you focus on that positive aspect, the more you're going to get that. I had this one brother, old head, want to sit here and say, well, your mind can focus on multiple things at once. I promise you, you can't. You can only focus on one thing at a time. That's the facts. But for some odd reason, someone that doesn't know rocket science, they want to tell you that, oh yeah, you can have multiple thoughts in your head at one time. You can't even smile thinking bad thoughts. It's so hard to think bad thoughts when you're smiling. So make it a point to smile, so you can think happy thoughts and productive thoughts towards your future. It's your future. You're in control of it. Think happy thoughts, not negative thoughts. Peace and blessings.